A confrontation with migrants is fueling calls for tougher immigration enforcement. It comes amid a back-and-forth legal battle about how much power state authorities have at the border.
The dysfunction in the Texas House during 2023 highlights the need for a change at the Capitol.
A push for change at the Texas Capitol. We meet the challenger looking to defeat House Speaker Dade Phelan. Artificial intelligence is already making a mark in Texas. How the state is working to find ways to use the technology and minimize concerns about AI.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hi there, and thank you for joining us. I'm Monica Madden.
I'm Ryan Chandler. Josh Hinkle is on assignment. Drama in the courts this week as Texas challenges the balance of power on the border.
And a confrontation Thursday along the border in El Paso is fueling calls for tougher enforcement. A group of more than 100 migrants forced their way through a razor wire fence. Then they pushed their way past National Guard troops to get to the border wall. Guard members and Border Patrol agents regrouped and detained the migrants before transporting them to a processing center.
That rush across the border comes amid uncertainty about what power state authorities have to arrest people that they believe illegally crossed the border. The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday allowed Senate Bill 4 to take effect. That's the Texas law that lets state authorities arrest people they suspect illegally crossed.
Hours later, a federal appeals court blocked the law again. The legal battle over SB 4 is far from settled, but law enforcement along the border is already grappling with how to implement the law.
We're the busiest station between Del Rio to El Paso.
Sheriff Thaddeus Cleveland and his 5 deputies oversee 54 miles of shared border with Mexico in Terrell County. A former Border Patrol agent himself, Cleveland says he supports Senate Bill 4.
It gives us another tool in the belt.
But says he and his deputies will still heavily rely on their federal partners, even if SB 4 gives him the power to arrest migrants for illegal entry.
When we apprehend an illegal alien, we call out Border Patrol. They'll determine if that person's here legally or illegally, and then take possession of them. I foresee us still doing that.
His jail can only hold 7 people, and the nearest port of entries are hours away.
That's going to take more man hours and manpower from my own office to transport them that way.
Another aspect of SB 4 allows state judges to order migrants to return to Mexico as an alternative to being jailed here. In the Valley,
those judges have a lot of discretion.
Hidalgo County Judge Richard Cortez questions how state judges will take on immigration cases if the law stands.
It's going to be a little hushpod of who wants to enforce it and who doesn't. I think a lot of that's going to be ideology.
In Austin, Governor Greg Abbott vowing Texas will keep fighting, no matter what happens in the courts.
To arrest people coming across the razor wire barriers on our border, and we will continue to use our arrest authority and arrest people coming across the border illegally.
You heard the governor refer to the authority to arrest migrants. For more than 2 years, the state has been making thousands of arrests under Texas trespassing laws.
All right, there's a lot to unpack here. So for some insight, we've brought our friend Aaron Torres, the Austin Bureau correspondent for the Dallas Morning News. Aaron, you've done some great work at tracking the back and forth in the courts with this. When can we expect some legal certainty that will tell us where this law is going to end up in the long run?
That won't be for a few weeks. So right now, the Fifth Circuit still has not issued their ruling on whether it can the law can go back into effect or remain in pause. There's another hearing scheduled for April 3rd in front of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Whenever the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals makes that decision after that April 3rd hearing, either Texas or the Department of Justice will appeal back to the Supreme Court to decide if the law will stay on pause or if it'll go into effect throughout the appeal process. So it'll be a few weeks.
And during the hearing in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, it seemed that the panel of judges, were maybe in support of some aspects of this law, but also might strike down others. I mean, where do you see it as if there's been more signals of how the courts might rule on this?
Well, it kind of depends. It's kind of hard to know because asking prodding questions doesn't sometimes indicate how the court or the judges will rule on the law. And you also have to understand that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is a fairly conservative court, but the 3-judge panel that heard this case was an a Biden appointee, a Trump appointee, and a George Bush appointee. The initial stay that was issued Wednesday night was a 2-1 decision. So we believe that it'll likely be a 2-1 decision, again, keeping the law on pause.
Y'all know, even before this has taken effect, we've seen a lot of challenges and complications with this law. We've seen multiple police departments from Austin to Fort Worth say that they don't think that this is their responsibility. They think it might make their jobs harder. What kind of challenges has this back and forth in the courts brought to police departments who are trying to figure out what to do here?
Well, obviously, it's brought several challenges. I was speaking, and I think a lot of reporters are speaking to like border area sheriffs who live in border communities, and they kind of told us the same thing, that like some of them said that they were ready to enforce the law. The Kinney County Sheriff told me a few days ago that they were ready to go to enforce the law when the ruling came down. I spoke to the Maverick County Sheriff. He said they were not ready to enforce the law. The Zapata County Sheriff, I believe, told me they were not also ready to enforce the law. They were waiting for DPS to give them some guidance on this.
And that doesn't even factor in just the legal ping pong we've been experiencing. It was in effect for a mere few hours before getting blocked again. So there's also that layer of complication for these law enforcement officials as they're trying to figure out what their legal duty is.
Yeah, and we haven't really received much clarity from the state of Texas on what exactly is going on. I haven't received any statement or clarity from the Department of Public Safety. The governor's office gave me a statement late Wednesday night, I believe, where they said that they're still in communication with the Texas Department of Public Safety and state law enforcement across the state to see how they would enforce the law. However, they declined to give details because, according to the governor's office, they didn't want to give a heads up to the cartels who would be smuggling and bringing drugs and weapons into the border. So that's why they didn't want to publicize any additional details, is what they told me.
Aaron, I'm glad you're here, because 3 minds is better than one when we try to grasp all these complicated factors. So we really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much.
From tracking accidents to answering your healthcare questions, artificial intelligence is being used now in Texas. We look at the work underway to make sure the technology is being used effectively and ethically. A push for new leadership at the Texas Capitol. A challenger aims to defeat House Speaker Dade Phelan. How he's promising big changes to the way lawmakers do business.
The race is on to determine the next leader of the Texas House of Representatives. On Thursday, one Republican House member launched his bid to challenge Speaker of the House Dade Phelan.
That's Dr. Tom Oliverson, and he promised major changes to how state government runs at the Capitol.
I'm announcing my candidacy for Speaker of the House.
Cypress Republican Tom Oliverson, the first to signal a sea change in the Texas House, challenging Republican Speaker Dade Phelan as Phelan faces a daunting runoff.
The dysfunction in the Texas House during 2023 highlights the need for a change at the Capitol.
His top priority, school choice. Governor Abbott's push to subsidize private school tuition, which failed to pass the House last year.
You need to say, if that bill doesn't pass, I'm not signing another bill all session.
That one issue has become the rallying cry for conservatives pushing to take the House farther to the right, like Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who led the Senate in passing school choice bills multiple times last year.
But as long as the Democrats have control of the Texas House on key issues, it will never be easy, and that's why we are where we are today.
Speaker Phelan has led the House to pass some of the most conservative laws in Texas history: the abortion ban, permitless carry of handguns, bans on DEI programs, and more. But his adherence to tradition in appointing some Democrats to chair committees and his lukewarm stance on school choice has turned conservatives against him. He told us in a statement Thursday, "As Speaker, I'm focused on winning these races, getting our team over the finish line, and ensuring we start the session united and ready to deliver another banner conservative session for Texans. That's the job of the Texas Speaker. But whose job it will be is an open question now." We want to take a deeper dive into what's at stake in the race for Speaker. So joining us now is politics reporter Jasper Scherer. You know him from the Houston Chronicle, but he just picked up a big new role at the Texas Tribune. Jasper, thanks for joining us.
For having me on.
So first and foremost, Jasper, I do think actually a lot of Texans don't even necessarily understand what the Speaker's role is in the Texas House. How could a change in this leadership affect public policy?
Yeah, I think the Speaker is one of the more influential lawmakers in the whole state, but they're elected in their one of 150 House districts, so it's just a small slice of the state that has probably been aware of who the current House Speaker Dade Phelan is. The implications for it'll essentially the Speaker decides what sort of bills reach the floor, kind of the flow of legislation in the House. They have a lot of power to, hold up stuff that they don't like or to make sure policies they support see the light of day. So, what's kind of at stake here is the chamber could move significantly to the right if Speaker Phelan, who's sort of in the kind of mainstream sort of establishment Republican camp, if he gets unseated in favor of somebody who's taxed a little bit farther to the right, we could see, if you can believe it, even more conservative policy coming out of Texas.
Because he has passed a lot of conservative legislation under his watch.
No doubt.
Near total ban on abortion, a lot of these border security measures. So
Parentless carry of handguns, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of an open question of how much further can the House and can the legislature as a whole even go? So I think it's going to be, how much further can they take things that they've already implemented? I'm not sure how much new policy ground there is to trod. So, I think some of it is kind of TBD at this point.
It seems like this election may turn on whether the candidate would appoint Democratic chairs, right? Speaker Phelan could get reelected if he can continue appointing Democratic chairs, keeping that coalition with only a few Republicans. Oliverson would have to do it with only Republican votes. Yeah. What path do you think is more likely given the politics of the House right now?
It's a good question. I mean, it could be sort of a third option, someone who's, stakes out a ground that's, a little bit to the right of Phelan, can maybe still attract Democratic support. If you're purely just looking at Oliverson and Phelan, I mean, I would think that it's going to be hard for Phelan to attract, if it's a question of those two, I would say Democrats would still lean toward Phelan, of course. Yeah. But I just don't know if it seems like he has lost quite a bit of confidence in the House, and there are going to be at least some members who are looking for a new option. I don't think Oliverson will end up being the only candidate to run, though, so we'll see.
Leads into my next question. Any other names you've been hearing thrown around? We heard Representative James Frank from Wichita Falls as a possible contender.
Yeah, I've also heard James Frank. I think Dustin Burrows, who's kind of a top lieutenant of Speaker Phelan, he always is kind of in the mix. Just he's held high-ranking positions in House leadership for a number of sessions now, and I think it's kind of going to be a matter of people who have done as little as possible to upset the smallest number of people. Right. I think the votes on private school vouchers are kind of a big litmus test. It's going to be hard to see a speaker come out who hasn't supported that policy.
But it's a long road ahead. Remember, this isn't even happening until January, this speaker election. So
and we got to see if Phelan survives his primary runoff. So
right.
Exactly, that's the X factor. I mean, that is by no means certain.
Yeah.
Jasper Scherer from the Texas Tribune, really appreciate you coming on.
Of course.
It's like the Wild West on this right now. It's good to get organized early around this.
Regulating AI in Texas. Lawmakers and experts form a new advisory council, who they're hearing from, and how the process could shape how the state uses artificial intelligence.
There's progress on plans to shape how the state of Texas deals with artificial intelligence. We've told you about the new state law that created an AI advisory council. The council is just beginning to meet, and they'll create a report later this year for lawmakers to parse through.
And our Will DuPree looked into what their work will focus on and how the state is already using AI technology.
Logging on to the Texas WIC website, women with questions about the nutrition program may find answers by asking Maya the chatbot. More than a third of state agencies are now using artificial intelligence tools like this, according to a 2022 report. And now a new advisory council created by this law has a tall task.
It's like the Wild West on this right now. It's good to get organized early around this.
Rahul Srinivasan studies AI policy and championed the idea of this council. The 7 members will catalog how the state is deploying this technology and suggesting ways to better implement it in the future.
There's opportunities, but there's also risk. That's their task in terms of balancing those two and figuring out how to move forward.
While the group's work is only beginning, UT assistant professor and AI researcher Samantha Shorey hopes they'll look closely at the data generated by any tools used by the state.
Data is so valuable. People have even said data is the new oil. What we don't want to see is that resource being sold and potentially that having negative effects for the people that were just seeking out help from their government agencies.
Will DuPree joins us now. Will, thank you for that reporting. I love these stories because every time you get lawmakers talking about AI or high tech, it always leads to some interesting sound bites.
Absolutely. You never know who has the most expertise on this, but in this case, they do actually have a lot of intelligence behind their knowledge of AI.
Yeah, this council met again on Thursday. What were they talking about then?
What they wanted is to hear from some of the state agencies and how they're potentially using AI, what their plans are, and whether or not they're going to do it in the future. Basically, what they all said is that, yes, it will be implemented in some sort of fashion in the future. However, what they're wanting to say is that they're developing rules about this. It's a slow-going process, essentially, for many of these agencies. But one of the examples that we heard from is from the Texas Department of Transportation. They said that they are running this AI software program in the Austin area. That's just this pilot, and it's focusing on trying to improve response times to any wrecks or construction or maintenance kind of work. And they've actually cut down response times to about 5 to 10 minutes, which is a big improvement. So they pointed to that and saying, yes, that is something that is a benefit from AI. But again, these conversations will continue to be had, and all state agencies are going to have to turn in reports to this council by July 1st, detailing how they use AI, what their plans are, things of that nature.
Well, that's great news. Every time we have these conversations about AI, you hear there are good sides and bad sides, good and evil. Are we getting any sense about what lawmakers will or will not allow in this new technology?
I think it might be a little too early to say. However, some of the conversations that were had during this council meeting on Thursday provide a little bit more of insight into that. And what I mean by that is that they are talking about data security and privacy. Those are two big concerns that a lot of the lawmakers mentioned on this council, as well as the state agencies. What they also shared is that AI will not be making any kind of decisions for the agency or for the people who work there. However, it might inform them so that they can draw upon data to better answer some of the problems that the state is facing.
Well, the clock is ticking. The next legislative session starts in just about 9 months, and this is a huge topic to get our hands on. What do they need to do now? I mean, what is the to-do list ahead?
So the law requires this council to have several different milestones, essentially, to follow up on before everything wraps up at the end of this year. So again, those state agencies are all having to fill out these inventory forms about AI that are due on July 1st. The council will then take those and then incorporate that into a report that they're going to put out by December 1st. That may be very important, especially ahead of the next legislative session, because some of that report may include policy proposals that the lawmakers will want to take up and address AI. The council could also put forward a statewide code of ethics about AI, which would be pretty novel for the state. They don't have something like that. Some of the individual agencies do, but this would be a statewide proposal for that. So that's something we'll have to definitely look for. And this report may actually be a guidebook for what proposals come into the session next year, because we'll be tracking so many bills will be introduced, but this at least might be the first chance to see how the state will potentially legislate AI use.
It's fascinating stuff. Yeah. Will DuPree, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
New developments in the push for accountability for the deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan. Why one Texas congressman says the blame goes beyond the White House. It's been 2.5 years since 13 U.S. service members died during the military's withdrawal from Afghanistan. But the push for accountability is still ongoing. Hearings this past week on Capitol Hill are part of that push. Texas Congressman Michael McCall chairs the powerful Foreign Affairs Committee. I spoke to him about that investigation and legislation that he hopes will prevent future tragedy. So what is the end goal here? What does accountability look like? And where do you place that blame based on what we know now?
Well, accountability, first of all, I've had to, threaten contempt twice now on the Secretary of State to produce documents. He finally did produce the dissent cable, and then he finally presented the notes to the after action review report, which have been very revealing about what was happening on the ground at the time. I think this really, all roads are going to lead to the White House on this. We heard from the generals that their advice from the very beginning, whether it was to withdraw and how to withdraw, were basically they were not listened to. And their advice was not taken at all. And the decisions made out of the White House and at the higher levels of the State Department really culminated with this awful suicide bomber event at Abbey Gate. And by the way, in addition to 13 service members, we had dozens injured and 170 Afghans were killed. We also have found out, because there was no plan, all these Americans are then left behind in enemy lines under the Taliban, and also our Afghan partners that we promised we would protect were left behind. And now those Afghan partners are being hunted down by the Taliban with their biometrics and being executed. So it's a very, very sad outcome.
And there's much more from the congressman. You can see the full interview now on our website. Just look for the clip in this week's State of Texas story. And thank you very much for joining us on State of Texas.
We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.